been?
Oh, pretty good.
Yeah, I've been thinking all week I'd run into you.
Yeah. I heard you was going off to Korea. Thought I'd better get over here and see you before you got off.
Yeah, you did. I'm taking the bus out early in the morning.
Oh. Thought you might want to go to the picture show. Miss Mosey's having to close it. Tonight's the last night.
Yeah, might as well go. You missed last night.
I was in a drugstore buying some toothpaste, I think, and I happened to look at the rack that they had, you know, paperbacks. And I was just looking through it, and there was a paperback called The Last Picture Show, and I thought, that's an interesting title. Sounds like a good title. And I picked it up, looked at the back, and it said, Kids Growing Up in Texas. I said, that doesn't interest me. I put it back. Then, a few months later, two months later, if not less, Sal Mineo, the actor, who's a friend of mine, gave me a copy of the same book. He said, here, you ought to read this. He said, you know, he said, I always wanted to be in it. He said, but I'm a little too old now. But I always thought it'd make a good movie. So I looked at it again, and again, it sat by my bed for a little while, and then I asked my wife to read it, who was Polly Platt, who worked with me in production design, and she read it. She said, well, I don't know how you make it as a picture, but it's a good book. And that was the beginning. That's how it started. Writing the script was really not so much writing the script as going through the book and deciding what was going to remain and what was going to be cut out. Because the basic construction of the book and the movie was 1 year from one football season to the next football season in the life of this small town in Texas. That was the basic construction.
I wonder what my chances are this morning of interesting you kids in John Keats.
None at all.
So, you know, there was a good deal more about the teacher, there was a good deal more about the preacher's son, and there were other characters that we took out. And it was really a question of winnowing out what we were going to keep. And then I added a few things that weren't in the book, like the graduation. I said, this is all about them graduating from high school, and we don't really have the graduation, so we put that in. And the original scene with Sam the Lion at the tank dam, when he tells the story about his affair with JC's mother, was quite different. The monologue in there was different. It was about urinating, and I said, this is not attractive, and can you write something else? And he wrote something else, which was quite good.
If she was here, I'd probably be just as crazy now as I was then in about 5 minutes. Isn't that ridiculous? No, it ain't really. Because being crazy about a woman like her is always the right thing to do.
I wrote one scene, the scene with the Sonny and his father and during the dance. I actually wrote that. It was based on something I had observed happen between Jerry Lewis and his father. Kind of cordial coolness.
Hi, Sonny. Hi, Dad.
How you doing?
Okay.
Well, that's good.
See ya.
Sure.
All the basic dialogue was pretty much as it was in the book. When we were doing the script, I would say to Larry, you know, the scene, you want to try another pass at it? I mean, it's good in the book, but why don't you do it again? So he'd write it again, I'd read it, I'd say, it's better in the book. He said, well, then use the book, you know. And that was what happened numerous times. The book was not very precise about the year, the period. I mean, it was sort of a general 50s. And so we decided on the end of November 1951 to the end of October 1952. And so then the music was chosen on the basis of that.
Speak to her, Miss
I used no score, we just used songs from the period. And that was, again, I was rather strict about it. So we didn't use anything that came out after the period movie was over, and only things that had come out before.
Jason?
What's on your feeble mind, Dwayne?
Saying it's been on a date.
Uh-huh. Why don't you just go back to Mexico? I guess girls are just easier to please down there.
Just go with me once more, just one more time. You can at least see me.
Cybill, at that time, I mean, I didn't know her at all. She was a model, and I was in a supermarket, and I saw, you know, the checkout stand, I saw her picture on the cover of Glamour magazine, a magazine I'd never noticed before. There was something about her expression that was very piquant.
Peter was in a grocery store and saw one of the covers and said, "That's JC," and bought the magazine and took it to the production office and ripped off the cover and put it up on the bulletin board and said, "We find that girl." But I remember I had my hair up a little bit and had a kind of wicked smile on my face and a T-shirt that said, "I love you, I 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 love you," all over the T-shirt. It was kind of pink and white. And I looked sort of mean and sweet at the same time.
Oh, quit prison. I don't think you did it right anyway.
We arranged for me to meet her when I went to New York to cast, because we did some casting in New York, in Dallas, in Houston, and in Los Angeles. And I was at the Essex House. She came up to see me with her manager or agent, and she was wearing blue jean jacket and then blue jeans and sometimes a shirt, white shirt. Big girl, tall, and, you know, broad. And she was very interested in going through college and not particularly interested in being movies, but she liked the script, and she thought it was an interesting part.
I wasn't too impressed with movie people. And every model I knew was studying acting, wanted to be an actor. And I'm very kind of stubborn and somewhat perverse in that I thought, ugh, these people, all these models want to be actors.
And she sat down, I remember it was early, and I had just had a little breakfast, and there was, you know how when you get breakfast, they send you a vase with a rose in it, you know, so she sat on the floor.
Hi, what y'all doing back here in the dark?
She kept playing with that little rose, and I just expected it to keel over and collapse, that rose, you know. And I thought, that's the way she plays with guys in the movie. A little gesture, sometimes a little movement, some little infinitesimal thing that an actor or actress does makes you sort of see the character. So I went back to California and I said, "This is the girl I want to use." And they said, "Well, how do you know she can act?" I said, "I don't know, I think she can."
The producer, Bert Schneider, wanted me to do a screen test. And Peter was saying, no, she can't do a screen test. She won't be any good. I know she can do this part. You've got to believe me. And Bert Schneider, I could just tell, you know, he's like, you know, he wasn't convinced. He located a screen test. This one I had done with Roger Vadim about a year before, in which I was doing Cat on a Hot Tin Roof scenes silent, because they didn't record the sound, and dancing silently to Rolling Stones' Black Sugar or something. And Peter said, "Oh, you found a screen test." He was quite alarmed. And when he sat down and saw it with Bert Schneider after it was over, he told me later, after I'd completely finished the film and everything, it's the only time he ever doubted that I might be able to play the part was when he saw the screen test. But he stuck by it. He insisted that I play the part. And I came to Los Angeles, and I read with, John Ritter and Bob Mitchum's son, as well as Jeff Bridges and Timothy Bottoms.
John Ritter was up for the part of Sonny, and he brought his father, Tex Ritter, to play Sam the Lion, and I remember them sitting there. And I would say that Tex Ritter came closest to playing it, but I got my heart set on Ben Johnson, and I wouldn't take any other person.
Sonny, food's getting cold.
I kept saying to Ben, "I want you to do this." "Oh, Pete, there's too many words, Pete." And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, there's too many words. I don't want to say all those words.
Give me a steak and try to use meat this time.
He used to say to me, God, I'd rather ride my horse 1,000 miles than say any of these goddamn words. He hated to talk.
So I called John Ford. Of course, Ben Johnson had worked for Ford, you know, and Ford discovered him. Ford says, oh, Jesus, well, give me the number, I'll call him. Phone rings a few minutes later, and Ben, you put the old man on me. I said, well, I'm trying to get you to do it. He said, well, damn it, Pete, I'll be back in town in about 3 or 4 days. I'll come over and see you. So he still didn't say yes. He came over to my office and sat down with the script, and he says, I don't want to say all these dirty words.
And try not to drink too much of that buggy water.
Oh, we'll just drink beer and tequila.
Yeah, you catch the clap, you wish you hadn't drunk nothing.
He came up with any goddamn reason not to do it. Finally, I said to him, Ben, you don't understand. You, in this role, are going to get an Academy Award. And he looked at me and he got really angry. He says, why the hell do you say that? I said, I don't know, you'll at least get a nomination, I'm telling you. I think you in this part is dynamite. Well, finally, I remember, I'll never forget it. He slammed the script shut, and he said, all right, I'll do the damn thing. And that's how he agreed to do it. And he did win the Oscar. Isn't that amazing?
Oh, well. We'll see you.
Hello?
I guess you'll be glad when basketball season's over.
Why?
Well, a coach probably don't get to stay home much during football and basketball season.
Oh, God, you know nothing about it, do you?
Timothy came up. I thought he'd be good. He had very sad eyes. And he was being highly touted at the time by his agent, who said he had the lead in the Dalton Trumbo movie, Johnny Got His Gun. And so I guess that's what convinced me.
Boy, I froze my ass last night.
Hey, why the hell can't you kids learn to tack?
I think it was back when I really just first started to go out in interviews. And I went for a casting call, basically. And as Peter tells the story, he saw me come in to the office, and he said, oh, there's Dwayne.
Jeff came in and read with Cybill, I think. Jeff was so likable that I thought he would be very interesting in this part, because the character, as written, Dwayne as written in the book and in the original script, not a very likable character, but I thought Jeff playing it would give the character some additional depth and some additional warmth and not make him such a bastard.
I get sad if I think of Sam for long.
We were having a hard time figuring out who to have play the 3 older women who were all in their mid-30s. And Bob Rafelson was one of the producers on the picture, and I said, Bob, I'm having trouble with these older women. And he gave me a list. He made out a list of about 20 older women, and on the list were about 20 people, including Cloris, Ellen Burstyn, and Eileen Brennan. So we saw all 20 people. Now, Ellen Burstyn came in, and I thought she was very interesting.
J.C., we're having supper at home tonight. I expect you there in 15 minutes. You hear?
Okay, Mama. I was just giving the boys a ride.
I was sent up to read for the part of the waitress that Eileen Brennan eventually played. And I read it in the script, and I thought, well, yeah, I could play that part, but I kind of like Lois. So when I went in to meet Peter to read for him, I said, I'll be glad to read the part of the waitress, but I really like Lois. Could I read for that too? And he said, sure.
So she read for all of them. And I've never done this before or since.
He offered me the part of Ruth Popper, and I said I didn't really want to play that part, that I preferred Lois. And Peter said to me,
well, you gave a great reading for all three parts, so I tell you what, you go home tonight and call me and tell me which one you want to play. Whichever one you want to play is the part you'll get. You're in the picture, so you decide. So she called me the next morning. She said, I'd like to play the young girl's mother. I said, okay. That was it. She cast herself.
Oh, hello, Sonny. What you want?
Coach said you need a driver.
Cloris came in, and she just gave a wonderful reading for the coach's wife.
The first thing I remember is meeting Peter at the office, I think. I think he asked me what part I'd like to play. It was interesting that I ended up with Ruth Popper. Don't you love that name? Oh, doesn't that tell you who you are immediately? You have to overcome a name like that, or live with it, or suffer it. If you think about what the kids must have done to her in school with nicknames, I know what they did with my name in real life.
I hope you ain't down the mouth about Charlene.
I ain't blue about
You don't
her.
even have a good disposition. What are you blue about then?
I had seen Eileen Brennan on the stage in Little Mary Sunshine in New York in the 60s, and just thought she'd be good. She had a kind of a good face for that part.
When I read that script, I can remember the first time I read it, that I was just overwhelmed by the power of that script. I mean, there was no question in my mind what I was embarking on, and I wanted so much to be a part of it.
Randy Quaid, we were casting down in Houston, and we saw a bunch of people, and Randy was one of the actors that came in. They brought him in for a different part. They brought him in for the rich kid from Dallas, and I thought he'd be great for Lester Marlowe. He was wonderful. That was his first movie. Sam Bottoms, who played Billy, we cast somebody else for that. Kid from Dallas. But I didn't think it was good casting. I was never happy with it. And the day we got to Archer City to start rehearsals, we were driving up the main street of Archer City, and I look out the window, sitting on the stairs. I said, stop the car, and we stopped. It was really almost like a cliche, and I got out. I said, who's this kid? I went over, I said, who are you? And he smiled. He said, well, I'm Sam Bottoms. I said, you related to Tim Bottoms? He says, yeah, I'm his brother. I said, what the hell are you doing here? He said, well, I'm coming to visit Tim for a few days. I said, do you act? He shrugged. He said, well. I said, could you take those braces off? He said, I have to ask my mom if I can take my braces off. I said, well, if you can take your braces off, I'll put you in the picture. So we had to get rid of the other fellow, pay him off.
She ain't home?
No, he and Mama went to the club.
Why do you join home on a Saturday night?
My original idea for casting that part of Abilene was to use the country singer Jimmy Dean. And it was the only casting that the producers, Bob Rafelson, Bert Schneider, and Steve Blauner, they didn't like the idea of Jimmy Dean. So my next choice was Clu Gulager, whom I had seen in Don Siegel's The Killers, and I thought it was a great performance. And he came in, and I thought he was an odd type and good regional quality. We cast him.
My history with Last Picture Show is kind of simple. It was my second movie that I ever worked on, and I worked on Peter Bogdanovich's first movie called Targets back in 1967. And we had a great experience together, and he said, well, if I ever do another movie, you're on it, and he was true to his word. And so when Last Picture Show came up 3 years later, he asked me to come work on it. So I started really being a kind of assistant production manager, and then doing the locations and doing the money, and then I acted in the movie. And so I had a lot of different jobs and worked very closely with Polly Platt, who was the production designer, to find the locations and give the right look to the picture, and of course working very closely with Peter as well.
The town where we shot the film that was in fact Larry McMurtry's hometown and the town he wrote about. I'd never been to Texas, really. So we drove around for a couple of days, all over. Larry loves to drive. We drove all over Texas, ended up down near Corpus Christi. And we saw exactly one town that I thought was fair through all that time. Then we drove on up to Archer City. And as we drove into Archer City, I said, my God, this is perfect. And Larry said, well, it ought to be. This is the town I wrote about. And everything was there, of course, because it was the town he wrote about. And I don't know how autobiographical it was, but obviously most of the incidents in the story happened to somebody. If not to him, they happened to somebody.
I remember walking in the streets of Archer City where we shot the film, and we'd watch people walking around the streets, and somebody would say, that's the real Dwayne there, that's the guy. It was all based on people that actually lived in the town.
I did not meet the real Lois, although I met her friends who talked about her and described her, but I didn't meet the woman herself. I don't think she came around. I'm not quite sure why. But it was very nourishing creatively to be in that town and to be, the movie house was still there.
Who was a tremendous help was a young fellow named Lloyd Catlett, who was a local high school kid. He was maybe a couple of years younger than we were. And he was hired for a role in the film.
We all chipped in and bought him a piece of ass. Thought he was getting tired of being a virgin. She got mad about something and blooded his nose.
As well as to be our coach, to give us dialogue, what that kind of accent in West Texas sounds like.
What do you mean, ask my girl for a date? You turn me loose! I'll turn you loose anytime you're ready to fight. Come on, let's have it out.
Looking at just the way he moved, how he spoke, what things were important to him. And that was the biggest research I did with him, was just hanging out with him, hanging out with Lloyd.
We all just hung out with him and picked up his way of talking and then just stayed in the accents.
Not much of a wedding night, huh?
Nope. Not much, Juan.
Here, have a little drink of bourbon. It'll pick you up. Take all of it. I'm going to drive.
The people of the town were not, and in the area, were not real happy to see their dirty underwear sort of aired out and the underside of the city, because I think a lot of these towns have these things going on. It's life, but nobody talks about it, and particularly then. This is 1970, so there were no sex scandals, there were no sexual harassment, there was nothing. Everything was just sort of overlooked, and it was always bubbling under the surface, but nobody ever talked about it. Well, the movie brought it all out, and certainly then the book became popular, and the movie was very controversial, and the people in the town were not happy about the sort of adultery and the sort of, the things that were not on the up and up that was going on in the town. And certainly those things were going on, and they were going on when I was there. So certainly when Larry was there, they were going on. And it's really, it's life. And there were little parties at these little places where people took their clothes off, and the kids were always getting into trouble, and kids were getting pregnant, and all. It was all going on, but nobody talked about it. And so the town was kind of upset that this came out and it was about their town, but, it was true.
I didn't know God made home.
The decision was made to shoot in black and white, which was something that Orson Welles suggested to me, because I thought nobody would let us, so it hadn't even occurred to me. And then I was discussing with Orson Welles at breakfast one day how I wanted it to have a tremendous amount of depth of field. He said, you'll never get it in color. So I said, well, I don't know how I'm going to do it. He said, well, do it in black and white. I said, well, they won't let me. He said, why don't you ask them? I said, well. So I said to Bert Schneider, I would like to shoot it in black and white. He said, why? So I didn't say, well, Orson Welles told me to. I said something like, well, I think the period be easier to convey in black and white, which is true. And I think that the actors, the performances will be better. Well, Bert went back to the studio and came back a week later and said, all right. So Orson was right.
The first scene I shot in the film was out by that lake, and I had to like be felt up by Timothy Bottoms, and I was so embarrassed, and I'd never done that.
And Tim, I don't think ever recovered from that. I mean, the kissing and the fondling and all that. I mean, he wasn't acting, you know. Can we get married? I mean, he was not acting in that scene, I'll tell you. She was, oh, I don't want to hurry. I don't want to hurry. I'm too old for screwing in cars, I remember. God, it's a good scene. This movie had to be brilliantly acted. So it was the only time I ever did this on a picture. I absolutely refused to have lunch or dinner or whatever it was with anybody but the actors. Nobody was allowed to sit at the actors' table except me and the actors. The crew was very annoyed.
Peter will be the first one to admit to you, on the last picture show, he wasn't the nicest person. He was out, he was fighting every inch of his way for the life to make a great film. He didn't care if the crew hated him. Half of them hated him, most of them hated him.
Crew did not like me on that picture because I excluded them, paid no attention to them, and didn't even talk to them because I was so focused on the actors.
There was an associate producer that came in and was giving me line readings on the side, and I didn't know what to do. I'd never acted before, and I went in, and Peter said to me one day, "What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you?" He said, "Well, this producer was telling me I'm not being lively enough or something," and he was furious.
You say that one more time, I'll bite you.
There was a script supervisor who gave me like a little line reading or something, and he was fired. Because the interesting thing is that because of my lack of acting experience, none, I was highly susceptible to anyone saying anything about my performance. I didn't know. And Peter was guarding that, and it was guarded it like a lion, like protecting his babies or something. Like, don't talk to her, you know. And it was smart.
The actors were, you know, did get along very well. They all interrelated. All the women kind of got to be chummy, and the guys were friendly. I encouraged that because that's what it needed. It needed that kind of bonding. And we were all down there for 11 weeks, you know, in Wichita Falls, Texas. There ain't that much to do in Wichita Falls, Texas.
It was that wonderful time where somehow the people that came together were at a point in their lives, at least this is the way I saw it, where they could all just bond.
We used to have lunch together all often, and we used to say, "Gee, something about this feels very special. What is this? Do you feel that?" And I'll say, "Yeah, yeah."
We all spent a lot of time together, and you know, we would all gather in one of our hotel rooms, and Jeff had his guitar, and he would play the guitar, and we would sing and get high together, and we had a lot of fun together. It was a real company.
Well, I was really surprised because I thought all these actresses that were like, you know, 10 or 15 years older than me would be mean because I was like the young beauty, and they would hate my guts, you know. And I got down there on location, and they were all wonderful to me. They are three extraordinarily generous and talented women that Peter found at the prime.
It was very interesting to see how much the actors got into their roles. And I just recently found out that Jeff Bridges actually did sketches of all the different characters that were on the set. And so he was so into the movie that he, you know, felt this sort of need to put down on paper what all these people and who all these people were and what they looked like. So I really thought it was an amazing process that all the actors went through because they got into the movie so much. Bobby Logan was the, quote, star athlete of the team, the high school team where everybody went to school. Bobby was the star quarterback on the football team and played on the basketball team and did all kinds of sports, but had a sort of ambiguous relationship with the coach, who was the husband of Cloris Leachman, and spent more time at school than he did at home, which was part of the problem, I think, in their relationship. There actually was a scene with me and the coach in the locker room that was cut out because we only had a certain amount of money to shoot the movie, and so during shooting, Peter had to make some cuts in the script in order to stay on schedule, and that was, of course, one of my scenes. I was very upset.
Now, you do me a favor, and I'll do you one.
Sure, Coach.
Now, my old lady's got to go over to the doctor in Albany tomorrow. You know women, there's always something wrong with them.
Yeah, I guess.
I think I was too naive in those days to realize that he was a homosexual, that my husband was a homosexual. And they didn't play that. They didn't point that up. They didn't deny it, but it wasn't obvious. I think Ruth goes to the clinic probably just for some kind of attention, some kind of stroking, some kind of somebody interested in her. I think Peter deliberately kept it vague. Maybe he just didn't know the answer, and I kept it vague.
Is it something bad?
No. To lean into it and give a little more meaning, the audience would have to prick up its ears and say, oh, did I miss something? I think maybe the result of not specifying it is that the audience is almost in Sonny's seat. Like, oh, like women are different.
You sure he won't come?
You know he won't. He's just starting basketball practice.
I had no idea what would be required. They're supposed to get naked, and so I just started at zero. And the first thing that happened is Timothy said, I ain't taking off my clothes for this scene. So we decided that we were too shy, and we'd get down to our underwear separately and not looking, and then get into bed, and then they would have another set of underwear planted in the bed, and we would get under the covers and pretend we're taking off our underwear and throw them out under the covers. So that's how we solved it. So we did it, and it was perfect. We did took off our clothes, got into bed, and he threw out his underwear. I took off my bra and pants completely and threw out the bra and pants I had on, completely forgetting what we'd planned, because now I'm the character. It really is amazing that you become your character. Well, of course, we laughed and had to do it again this time. I did it the right way. But it was hard. It was hard to make love in front of people. And in the circumstances of the story, which is, she so would like for it to be wonderful, but the springs squeak. I mean, it ruins everything, and just like, oh, can anything ever be right? It's very poignant, I think. And he's so nervous and self-conscious, his character. But I love what Timothy did. I think, and he was a little kid then. He really was a young guy.
Hi, JC.
Hi.
The nude scene, a very famous scene, not only in the movie, but in the making of the movie. Obviously, first of all, I had to find the place to shoot the nude scene, because it was supposed to be an indoor swimming pool, which there were several of in the area. It was a very sort of, people who were very wealthy in the area had these big ranch houses, and a lot of them had indoor swimming pools. But we couldn't really find anybody that would let us shoot this scene in their swimming pool, because it was a nude scene, and certainly there were no, in those days, everybody was very conservative and very prudish about all of this.
Well, you got to get undressed out there on the diving board.
So everybody gets to watch.
I found a spa kind of place in this little kind of mall area in Wichita Falls, and we took it over and we built a set around their pool.
My big quandary on Picture Show was, should I do the nude scene or not? Peter had said, look, you don't have to commit to the nude scene. When it comes the day to shoot it, we're going to talk about it, and you're not going to have to do it if you don't want to. And which was the only way I would have agreed to do the picture. I started plaguing nagging Peter to sign something. I even gave him a piece of paper. I said, look, I've had my lawyer write this up. I want you to sign it and get Bert Schneider to sign it as producers, say that if I do the nude scenes, no still photos can be published anywhere else, anywhere. And he would say, I can't do that. And I would keep nagging him. And I remember one time we were walking up behind that Archer City, behind the hotel, and I was walking up through some mesquite trees, and I was saying, Peter, I really need you to sign that. And he turned to me and said, if you ever mention that again, I will never give you another piece of direction. He turned away and walked away, and I never mentioned it again. I went to Eileen and Cloris and Ellen separately and asked them, what would you do if you're in my position? Would you do the nude scene with Peter? And they all came up with the same answer, which is, we think he's really talented. We would do it. Trust him. You can trust Peter. I feel like you can really trust him. And it was that advice from those three actresses that sort of pushed me over towards, okay, I'll do the nude scenes. Supposed to be a private indoor pool. It looks like I'm in the room with all those people, but the room is completely empty. He shot that side first, and I hadn't seen it. And when I came out to do my part on the diving board, that was easy to act because I was taking off my clothes in front of people, but not very many people. There was only the camera operator and the sound, the boom guy, and a lot of people were really pissed off because Peter really did clear the set.
She was nervous about doing the nudity, and I was nervous about it because by the time we did it, I had fallen for her, and we were had started an affair, so of course it was more difficult to do it.
Frame enlargements were gotten by Playboy, and I sued Playboy. And as a result of my lawsuit, we got it into the Screen Actors Guild that you have to have an actor's written permission to print a nude still.
I don't think there's anything in this tank except turtles.
That's what I like about it, tell you the truth. Want to try one?
Sure.
We were going to do this scene by the tank dam, and it was an overcast day. In fact, it was cloudy, no sun. We got down there in the morning, as usual, and I shot all the other angles first, panning the area, and then the kids throwing stones, and about 2, 3 shots that we did. And then we turned around and we're going to do the big scene. And I think I rehearsed it a couple of times. Ben knew the words, and Tim knew the words. And so I had said, look, I want to do this without a cut.
I reckon the reason why I always drag you out here is probably I'm just as sentimental as the next fella when it comes to old times.
First take. It was a long scene. And if you had said to me, would you like the sun to come out? I would have said, yeah. And if you'd said to me, where would you like it to come out? I'd say, here. That's what happened. But nobody asked me. It just happened. And right at the moment when you'd say, God, wouldn't it be nice if the sun came out? The sun came out. And I just hoped the exposure was all right. So at a certain point, I remember I was looking over here to see how the clouds were moving, and suddenly I heard a pause. I heard silence that I wasn't supposed to hear. And I said, what the hell is that? And I realized that Tim Bottoms had forgotten his next line. And, a few seconds had passed, and a few seconds is bad. I was supposed to be without a cut. So I yelled out the line. He still didn't say it. So I said it again. Finally, he said it. Well, now it was 25 seconds or something, and I thought, there goes that scene because I didn't want to cut.
I thought they'd change with some age, but it didn't turn out that way.
Being married always so miserable?
No, not really. About 80% of the time, I guess.
So we finished the scene, and I remember I wanted to strangle Tim, and he says to me, well, I didn't forget my line. I said, well, what happened? Well, he said, I was thinking. So we shot it again. No pause, no sun. The minute I said, all right, cut, print, we got it, started to rain, poured. When we saw the dailies, well, of course, there was no contest. The scene with the sun was phenomenal. The scene without the sun was okay. So I had to cut the pause out, which meant I had to cut somewhere I didn't want to cut. But, you know, I wasn't about to lose that scene.
Oh, yeah, y'all been gone, ain't you? Gone to Mexico. You don't know about it.
About what?
Sam died yesterday morning.
Died.
One of the things that happens on a movie is that you're going along creating this other story that's really a life story, a story about life. And you sort of go into what I call the tunnel, and everything else drops away. But you have to remember that real life goes on as well. And one of the real sad things that happened during the movie was that Peter's father passed away. And, you know, it became a terrible dilemma for Peter to stop the movie that he was shooting, which was really his big start in Hollywood, and deal with the death of his father. And he had to go back to Phoenix and deal with the funeral and everything.
And then right after that, we shot the scene with Sam's funeral. I had to break it up into shots, and I did that morning. I planned it out, you know, on a piece of paper before I got to the set, how it was going to go. And that's pretty much what we shot. With the hat, my business with the hat, I put that in at the last minute. It was a running thing, so I just thought it would be a good place to do it. You know?
It was a very sad and tragic time for Peter, and just, you know, one of those things that's so difficult to handle and then go on with your life. And, you know, I think that there's a lot of Peter's grief in the scene, and it turned out, you know, to actually affect what we were shooting and be part of what we were shooting.
One of my favorite stories that happened became a acting lesson for me forever. And it's this scene where Lois is sitting in her living room and she's just bored to death. And then she hears a car and then recognizes the sound of that car. And that means that it's Abilene. Oh, good, he's coming to see her. And then she gets up and leaves the room and goes to the door expecting to see Abilene, but instead sees her daughter and is disappointed, and then realizes, oh, her daughter was with Abilene, and she had sex with him.
Oh, he's just awful,
And
Mama.
then
Why do you fool with him?
there is the jealousy, and then finally the maternal feeling. And I was sitting on the set. We were setting up for this shot. It was a kind of long, complicated shot that started in one room and went into the other room. And as I was sitting there, I realized that I had 8 different steps to go through to express 8 different emotions and no line. And I said to Peter, Peter, I've got 8 different things to express here without a line to help me. And he smiled, this mischievous smile, and he said, I know. And I said, well, how am I going to do that? And he said, erase everything else from your mind and just think the thoughts of the character, and the camera will read it. And that was the best acting lesson I ever got in my life.
I don't know what I'm going to do. Bobby was the last one.
No.
I'm just going to be an old maid.
No, honey, that's just the way it goes sometimes, you know. You win a few, you lose a few.
What do you do? Nothing's ever the way it's supposed to be at all.
You're right. Come on.
Well, the one thing that I always felt about Peter when I first met him and when I first worked on Targets and then on Last Picture Show is that he knew what he wanted. Right or wrong, he knew what shots he wanted, and he had studied the great directors of the past, and he had noticed that a lot of them didn't do a lot of coverage. Now, in those days, I didn't know what coverage was. I was fascinated by how he would shoot the movie, and sometimes, you know, he would shoot a half a scene here, and then he would cut and he'd go over here and shoot the rest of it over here.
I thought we were still best friends.
We are. What you so mad for? I never done that to you.
Well, I guess screwing my girl ain't nothing to you?
I ain't screwing her.
Hell, you ain't.
This was my second picture, and I never had heard the expression master. A master scene. Well, as you know, a master scene is basically one camera position that shows the entire scene. It was about a 4.5, 5-page scene. And the actors, Tim and Jeff and I, had rehearsed, because it was such a complicated scene in terms of, not only in terms of a lot of dialogue and physical, but also I didn't want to just have the two of them standing there. So they knew exactly how I was going to cut it, and so I'd let them rehearse it a few times straight through without interrupting them, so that they would get what it would feel like, knowing that they were going to have to be interrupted when we shot it. I would say we rehearsed that scene more than we rehearsed any other scene in the picture, for that reason, because I knew that it needed a flow, and yet I wouldn't be able to give them the flow because it had to be done in pieces, because there was no way to show that in one shot. Never even thought to have a master, didn't see what the purpose was. So anyway, we started to shoot it, and I remember the continuity fellow, the fat man, Marshall Schlamm, and Robert Surtees, the cameraman, came over to me and took me aside, and they said, "Peter, aren't you going to shoot a master?" I said, "What?" And they said, "Aren't you going to shoot a master?" I said, "What's that?" They said, the whole scene without cutting, so you know where they are. I said, "What do you mean, so I know where they are?" "Well, you don't know where they are if you..." I said, "Yes, I do." I didn't know what they were talking about. I thought I was losing my mind. Well, as it turned out, we shot it exactly the way I wanted to. We did not shoot a master. We shot it in pieces, exactly the way it planned. It was about 45 setups. When the dailies came to Hollywood, Bert Schneider looked at them and got worried, and he called Bob Rafelson, who was a director, as you know, he directed 5 Easy Pieces and so on, and Bert was a producer. So he called Bob, he said, "Bob, I want you to look at these dailies." He said, "Because I think we're in trouble. I mean, there's no master shot, and I don't know how this is going to cut." So they looked at it. And Bob afterwards stood up and said, "He's cutting in the camera." He said, "What?" He said, "This is going to cut like butter. I mean, he's cutting in the camera. You look at it, you'll see, you cut the slates off and it'll cut." He said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, he knows what he's doing. Leave him alone." They were going to fire me. But he said, "Fire him? Are you crazy?" He said, "He knows exactly what he's doing. Leave him alone." And that was, thank God. Part of the last picture show is when they go to the last performance at the picture show. And they see a Western. In the book, Larry, who hates movies, chose a lousy Audie Murphy Western called The Abilene Kid. Probably just because it was a lousy picture, and he figured, that probably what they'd show is some lousy Western. And he's probably right, but I didn't, being more romantic fellow, I thought the picture show ought to go out with a little bit more style. And so we booked Red River to be the last film.
Take him to Missouri, Matt.
So long, buddy.
So long, Clay. Be careful. I'll take care of the mercury for you.
I'll see you in a year or two if I don't get shot.
What happened was I put my arm around Jeff and we walked the whole block. We walked back a couple of times, talking about the scene. And then we came back and we shot it.
I ain't over yet, I ain't over yet.
He was just perfect. First take. Perfect. I said, "Print it." I walked away. And Bob Surtees came over and says, "Peter, we have to shoot it again." I said, "Why?" He said, I think we were underexposed." I said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "The guy was great. I don't want to shoot it again." He said, "Well, it's not good enough. It's underexposed."
For some reason, I can't remember what it was, the wrong stop on the camera or something, and we just had to do it again. And that happens so often in movies, where you think it's done and you have that sigh of relief, and you're going back to your trailer, your chair or something, thinking, "Oh, wow, I got through that. That's great." And then they say, "Oh, no, there's a hair in the gate, or the f-stop wasn't right, or some little glitch." That happens all the time. And then Robert Surtees, the great cinema photographer who, gave that look of that picture, walked off. He was all insulted,
I snapped at him. He turned around and walked away, went into the hotel and refused to come out because I yelled at him. So the production manager and everybody came over and said, well, he's upset. I said, well, I'm upset. I said, I got a performance out of an actor. I said, I don't know if he's going to be able to do it as good again. I mean, he screwed up. What's he upset about? I should be the one who's upset. Well, you yelled at him. Well, I yelled at him because I'm pissed.
Peter, got emotional about it and was upset, And I think they clashed on occasion.
Anyway, he came back and relit it, and Jeff did it wonderfully. But Bob was right. We couldn't use the other one. It was underexposed. There were two moments in the picture, two scenes in the picture that I knew were very, very moving.
What am I doing apologizing to you? Why am I always apologizing to you, you little bastard?
One of the scenes was the one with Cloris Leachman at the end where she cries and she yells and all that. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to rehearse it or do anything except do it. The other was when Tim Bottoms has the line,
He was sweeping, you sons of bitches! He was sweeping!
It was a very, very moving line. So I wouldn't let Tim rehearse it. I wanted it in one piece without a cut. So I told Tim this, and now I said to the crew, now look, you got to think we're blowing up a bridge.
And he referred to blowing up the bridge and Bridge on the River Kwai, that you can only do it once, and all the cameras better be rolling.
We don't have 7 or 8 cameras, we got 1 camera. We're not going to do it again. We have only got 1 bridge. I don't want to do this twice. So everybody said, all right, and we rehearsed it a couple of times, and then we did it. Now, that was the only once or twice in my life where I was speechless. But we did that shot, and Tim was absolutely brilliant. And I remember he did it, and he walked out of the shot, and I said, cut it, print it, and I was choked up. I could not speak. And I went over to him, and I put my arm around him, and we walked the whole block. I remember we walked the whole block, didn't say a word, and I just walked all the way up, and then we walked back, and didn't say a word. He knew it was perfect, and I knew it was perfect.
It is one of the most moving scenes in movies. Because Timothy Bottoms had never rehearsed that, never been allowed to read, never say those words out loud until he was on camera. And that, I think, was genius in filmmaking, and a wonderful, marvelous, that mystery, the magic that can happen.
3 months I've been apologizing to you without you even being here. I haven't done anything wrong. Why can't I quit apologizing? You're the one ought to be sorry.
Cloris Leachman's last big scene, the last scene in the picture, really. Well, during the shooting, Cloris would come over and she says, I've been working on that last scene. I want to do it for you. I said, don't want to see it. So what do you mean? I said, I'm not going to see it until we shoot it.
Look at me. Can't you even look at me?
She said, well, I want you to see if I'm doing it right. I said, well, I'll tell you that day. I said, I don't want to see it. Why not? I said, because I don't.
I thought it was pretty much a first rehearsal on film. And he said, cut, print. And I said, wait a minute, I can do this better. He said, no. I said, no, please. I begged him if I could do it better. He said, no, that's fine. She
was annoyed. But it paid off because, boy, that was the first take. What you see in the picture is the only take. I said, what's no point in doing that again? You're never going to do that as good. She was so excited and nervous about it and so apprehensive and worried and knows this was a big scene that she could hardly breathe. There was not one frame cut together while we were shooting, and I physically cut that myself, last picture show, mostly at night.
Peter Bogdanovich and I both figured that our romance was over when the movie wrapped. And then I went home to Memphis for the holidays, and he tried to go back to his life here in California, and we were both devastated by not having each other. He missed me terribly, and I missed him, and I flew out to meet him in California, and I spent many a night really sleeping on a couch in the editing room as he cut picture show on a moviola.
That's when the picture started to look pretty good to me as I was putting it together. And I did that for about 6 months. Bert Schneider said, "Do you want to take credit as editor?" And I said, "No, it says directed, and I wrote the script with Larry, and what's it going to say, edited by?" I mean, I thought that'd be a bit much. So Bert called me in his office. The Editors Guild says, "You got to give somebody credit." "Ah," I said, "that's ridiculous." He said, "Well," he says, "we got to do it. It's a union picture. If you can take the credit, if you want it." He said, I said, "I don't want to take the credit. It's just going to look ridiculous." He said, "Well, who are you going to give it? You got to give it to somebody." I said, "Well, give it to Don." And Don Cameron was at that time editing Drive, he said, right next door. And just as I was finishing up the picture, I was starting to prepare What's Up, Doc, and I had to order some opticals, the dissolves and a couple of things like that. And I asked Don if he would order them for me, because you have to do some paperwork. So that's what he did. He ordered the dissolves and got credit for this picture.
Look at that, Larry. They can catch.
Feisty son of bitches, ain't they? Wish they could tackle to do something useful.
There were a lot of people with opinions on the picture. And the producers all felt that the picture should not be longer than 2 hours. They arbitrarily felt it should be less than 2 hours. The picture was 2 hours and 25 minutes. And it was clearly too long, and I knew it. But once it was down to 2 hours and 10 minutes, those last 10, 11 minutes they wanted me to cut out, that was tough. We got it down to, I think, 119 minutes. And that was where we released it. A couple of all the reviews were quite good, but a couple of the reviews said, we wish we'd know more about who these two boys live with. Who are their parents? And I immediately took those reviews, went to Bert and I said, "See, we shouldn't have cut that damn scene with Eileen Brennan when she says you living with your dad and Dwayne living with his mom. It ain't right." There was a scene which explained that.
I don't know, you and Dwayne both in a board now. Him with the mother and you with the father don't seem right.
I said, "Let's put that back in." So within 4 or 5 months after the picture opened, we did put this 1 minute back, and that made it a 2-hour movie. I was shooting What's Up, Doc, and the phone rang, and it was Bert Schneider. And he said, "Are you sitting down?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Okay, Newsweek magazine. You ready for this? Here's the opening line. The Last Picture Show is the most important film by a young American director since Citizen Kane." I said, "Jesus Christ, really?" And he said, "Yes, what it says." And I hung up, and I went out, and I thought, wow, I must be pretty smart, and I must be pretty good. But I couldn't think about it too long because I had to do the shot, so that was one memory. The other one was when I was in Stockholm doing a little publicity for the picture, and again Bert calls me up, and I'm in a hotel in Stockholm, and he says, "Peter, you sitting down?" I said, "Just a minute." I sat down. I said, "Yeah, I am now." He says, 8, count them, 8 Academy Award nominations. I said, "Whoa." He said, "Yeah, 2 of them for you." I said, "Well, Best Picture, I count on that. That's 3 of them for me as I counted." He said, "Oh, all right, 3 of them for you." So, those things don't happen too often.
It's graduation present. Hope you like it.
I came back for the next season of the Mary Tyler Moore Show and told them that I'd done this film in Texas. I told them a little bit about it, and that was the end of that. Didn't even think about it. Until I got a call that I'd been nominated for an Oscar. Can you imagine?
I can remember waking up to the phone ringing at about, it seemed like 5 o'clock in the morning. I don't know what time it actually was. Someone saying, "You've been nominated for an Academy Award." I thought it was a dream. I couldn't believe it. And then it all kind of dawned on me, wow, this thing is real. And it was a wonderful validation to be acknowledged like that by people who do what you do, you know.
And just then they announced the winner, and it was I. And so the world stopped. You're so frightened that maybe there was a mistake, and you get up and it isn't you. And I guess it was. So something hit me like the force that blew up Marilyn Monroe's skirt. And it didn't come back down for about an hour and a half.
Oh, gee, tell us about it, J.C. What was it like?
I just can't describe it.
I had never done anything more exciting. I'd fallen in love with movie making and my director and the whole process. So I felt like my life was over. I just thought, wow, it was so incredible to have gotten this one part. I never imagined that I would really work as an actor and have a career and support myself. I'm still amazed at that.
So you're closing the show.
Nobody wants to come to shows no more. Kid baseball in the summer, television all the time. Sam had lived. I believe we could have kept it going. But I just didn't have the know-how.
It's wonderful to be part of a classic movie. I think actually my most important memory from being part of that movie was a letter I got from a young man in Texas. He was suicidal, and he was planning to kill himself that night. But in the afternoon, he was just kind of passing the time, and he dropped in to see the Last Picture Show. And there was something about my character, he couldn't say exactly what it was, that made him decide not to kill himself.
Abilene, you asleep?
No.
Feel like company?
Well, I thought I'd drive out, see how my well is coming.
Drill hard. Better at all wells anyway.
He felt, well, her life isn't so good either, but if she can manage to go on living, so can I. And he thanked me for my performance. I don't think you can ask for a more meaningful response to your work than that.
Well, now I know why Sam liked you.
Love me.
Loved you, I mean.
Do you? Well, I can kind of see what he saw in you, too.
The picture became a tremendous success. It set me up for many years to do films without too much interference. Made a lot of mistakes. I think, you know, you get that kind of success early on. It's also difficult because you have to live up to it. And you're never going to do another picture like that, because unless you just keep doing the same movie, how can you do it? You know, you're going to do different kinds of movies. We did that one, you know. Can't keep doing it. I remember I was having a conversation with Orson Welles one time. We were talking about Greta Garbo. And he loved her, and I do too, but I mean, he was rhapsodizing about her, and he said, and I said, you know, I agree with you, but isn't it too bad that she only made 2 really, really good pictures out of 40, you know? And he looked at me for a long time and he said, well, you only need 1.
I read the book of The Last Picture Show, which I thought was a very moving and beautiful book by Larry McMurtry. It seemed to me that Texas of that period would look too pretty in color, because color does romanticize, and I thought this story had to have a hardness and a density that you just don't get in color.
Director Peter Bogdanovich is talking about the making of The Last Picture Show.
I was very intrigued with the idea of it being set in the 50s. And it's amazing now, really, it's only 3 years since the film came out. 3 years ago, people didn't think of the 50s as a period, and now it's the period. I spent actually about 9 months casting the picture, which is the longest I've ever spent on any picture, but it was a major project in terms of finding people in Texas and so on. Casting the leading roles was difficult because it was all unknown actors. And today, it's, you know, Timothy Bottoms, Jeff Bridges, Cloris Leachman, Ben Johnson, Cybill Shepherd, Ellen Burstyn. Ben Johnson turned the picture down 3 times because he said there's too many words. There's too many words, Pete. And I said to him, Ben, you've got to do this picture. If you do this picture, I swear you will win the Academy Award. He said, yeah, well.
Sonny, food's getting cold. What are you grinning about? Chicken fried me a steak and tried to use meat this time.
I was walking through a supermarket, and a girl was looking at me from the cover of a magazine. We found out who it was. It was a girl named Cybill Shepherd. And I said, that's the kid. That's the girl. You could just see her like a butterfly going from flower to flower, wilting them as she went, you know? And that was the character, too. It gave me the idea for how the character should be played.
Why don't you just go back to Mexico? I guess girls are just easier to please down there.
Just go with me once more, just one more time.
You can at least see me.
You find somebody else to pester. I've got a new boyfriend now, and I can't be talking
What
to
new boyfriend? Who?
Bobby Sheen, of course.
Bobby Sheen? You crazy?
I certainly am not. I guess I've just been wanting to go with him all along and never realized it. Maybe we'll see you in Wichita sometime.
In other words, the character wasn't a malicious girl or one who went out actively to hurt people. She just did it with complete ease. It was just selfish and kind of casual. There's a misconception about me, which is that I was a critic before I became a director. In point of fact, I was an actor in the theater from the time I was about 15. And then when I was 19, directed my first play in New York off Broadway, produced and directed a show, and continued to direct. I also began to write about film. I just didn't have much success as a director in the theater, and so that people heard of me first as a writer, as a critic, and that became the story. And then, and because I could get into movies free. I've been asked many times about the 2 film clips that are in the film. The reason I ran Father Bride because I wanted as big a contrast to the lives of those kids in that small town in Texas as possible. And nothing could be a bigger contrast than a sort of Hollywood version of middle-class America. What is, in fact, The Last Picture Show. In other words, the last movie they go to see in that small town before the theater closes. For me, had to be a film that was set in Texas somehow. And I wanted it to be a film about the days when Texas had a glory and a kind of reason for being. I wanted a picture about adventure and a picture about blazing trails. There wasn't any choice. It was Red River, and it was purely from subject matter. I thought it was better that the movie theater closed with a bang rather than a whimper. There's a scene between Jeff Bridges and Tim Bottoms where they have a big fight about J.C., played by Miss Shepherd, and of dialogue, one of the longest scenes in the picture. And we rehearsed the actors a lot, but then we never shot any of it in one continuous take. We did all little bits and pieces of it, 4 lines here, 5 lines here, 3 lines there, 1 line here, and a lot of different camera angles. I would say about 35 different camera angles, and they're all in the picture. I think it's one of the best shot scenes in the picture. In fact, I think it's the sequence in the film that I'm most happy with. And the last picture show in this release is a minute and a half longer. And the reason is because I cut this scene, which is between Eileen Brennan and Tim Bottoms. Not because the people didn't like the scene, but they wanted the film to be under 2 hours.
Say, I hear Dan's going back to work soon. I guess you'll be quitting before long.
Honey, we got $4,000 worth of doctor bills to pay. I will probably be making cheeseburgers for your grandkids.
And recently, because I had to check a print for the new release, I ran the picture. Good, but I thought the performances were just wonderful. In fact, the next day I called Cloris Leachman, and Ben Johnson was so wonderful, and Jeff Bridges. All the actors were just, you know, really good. You really, it's hard to make a bad picture when you have that many good actors working for you.